Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Realizing UNDRIP session on a land back story. I'm very excited to share this story with you with the support of our speakers and others. This story is a very powerful and inspirational one around the collaboration between the Leq'á, Mathxwi, and Semá Society and the City of Mission with the support of the province of BC. I'm Bob Purdy. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Fraser Basin Council. And to start us off in a good way, I would like to invite Chief Alice McKay, Chief of Mathxwi First Nation and a Director of the Leq'á Mathxwi Semá Society, to provide an opening prayer and some welcoming remarks. Chief McKay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As mentioned, my name is Alice McKay. My traditional name is Yamate Mathxwi. I am the Chief of Matsqui First Nation, have been here for 25 years. I'd like to welcome you all here today. I am sitting in the traditional lands, the original lands of Matsqui First Nation, and I would like to open us up with a prayer. We've got good grandmothers, good grandfathers, creator of all good things. Thank you for this new day. We are here to have good discussions and to ask for good direction. Take care of our families while we are away. Take care of the ones that couldn't make it here today, and bring us to a safe place at the end of the day. All my relations. Well, thank you so much. I do apologize. It is my first meeting. I haven't been as up to date as Cindy and Daryl. I just come in and out because of my busy schedule, but I am so proud that we are where we are in this initiative. I am proud to be a part of LMS, and Matsqui First Nation is just so happy that we're at this point where we can share our story. So I would like to hand it over to Daryl to do a land acknowledgement. And once again, I apologize. I haven't been involved in this as much as I could have been. So Daryl, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Chief McKay does a lot more than she gives herself credit for us. I'd just also like to welcome everybody to the unceded traditional territory of the Sq'eq'ó people, specifically the Leq'á, Mathxwi, and Semá nations.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief McKay and Daryl. And again, welcome to you all. I wanted to take just a few moments to lay out what we're planning for our session today, and also just share a little bit of information about the Realizing UNDRIP Initiative and the Fraser Basin Council, which hosts the initiative. And I'm also going to ask Andrea, our program lead for Realizing UNDRIP, to convey to you some handy Zoom tips that will help you get the most out of this learning event. So first of all, we are just finishing the proceedings of opening the meeting in a good way. Once I'm done with the overview of the Realizing UNDRIP initiative, then we'll get into the important part of this meeting, and that's the sharing of the story, courtesy of a couple of speakers I'll introduce in a moment. We're going to then have sort of an interview of the speakers, followed by an opportunity for you all to ask your questions. We may not be able to get to all of your questions, but we'll do the very best we can. And I should note that this meeting is being recorded so that we can post this on our Realizing UNDRIP website, so that those who could not be here today will be able to benefit from the learning. And then to finish this up, we'll have some closing reflections and promptly finish at 1 o'clock. So with that, just a very quick overview of the Fraser Basin Council. Next slide, please, Andrea. The Fraser Basin Council was formed as a not-for-profit society in 1997, and our mission was to advance sustainability in a mighty river system And our vision for that river system is a vision for sustainability, which you can read yourself, but it integrates the three dimensions, the environmental, economic, and social dimensions of our world. And indeed, that's easy to say, this vision statement. It's a little harder to do because it involves collaboration. So the Fraser Basin Council, its role is primarily as a setter of safe tables to bring people together, to learn, to get to know each other, and to work together to take action on sustainability. And very early in our evolution, we realized that we could not achieve our mission without the meaningful engagement of First Nations as an order of Canadian government. And we have 8 First Nations directors on our board, sitting alongside federal, provincial, local representatives, as well as members of the private sector and civil society. We believe that sustainability and reconciliation go hand in hand, and that's why we've launched the Realizing UNDRIP Initiative. The Realizing UNDRIP Initiative, its genesis came from our First Nations directors. Next slide, Andrea. And our First Nations directors, I asked them the question, what can the Fraser Basin Council do to help realize the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in a meaningful way in communities large and small, rural and urban throughout British Columbia? And our directors, our First Nations directors said 2 words to me: Bob, the Fraser Basin Council needs to do settler education. So that was the beginning of Realizing UNDRIP. And our vision is very straightforward. You can read it yourself, but really moving forward together in a good way to advance reconciliation, recognizing that in order to advance sustainability, you need to also advance reconciliation hand in hand. I know those are 2 words that have different meanings to different folks, but for the Fraser Basin Council, we're very clear that we cannot go forward with sustainability unless we have good relationships among all British Columbians, but in particular, we need to move forward with good relationships with Indigenous peoples. And that's our vision. Next slide. And in a nutshell, we believe very profoundly that within the saying "nothing about us without us," in reference to the importance of Indigenous leadership in everything that we do at the Fraser Basin Council, and specifically in relation to the Realizing UNDRIP Initiative. And very proud to say that we have 4 esteemed leaders who are serving as the first nucleus of our Indigenous Advisory Council, and it will be expanding over time to bring in a full range of interests from the Indigenous leadership space throughout British Columbia. And thanks particularly to Grand Chief Kat Penier, who unfortunately had a meeting conflict today, but he's been really a great stallo voice in guiding our work together. Next. And simply Realizing UNDRIP does some very straightforward things. We believe in the power of story. We believe in stories that capture what's working well and why. And so we are gathering knowledge about these stories. We have some 90 plus or even more than 100 success stories already. And the second piece is to share that knowledge through learning events like the one today, as well as our web resources. So take a look at realizingundrip.ca to get access to those web resources. And we also, as facilitators of safe table discussions with diverse interests, we also facilitate the application of the lessons learned on the ground in context. So which stories have the most import in a given local context. And we're not doing this work in isolation. We're linking with others doing similar work to ensure that we explore opportunities for synergies and avoid the duplication that can be common when silos doing certain things don't bridge with other silos doing similar things. So that's Realizing UNDRIP in a nutshell, advancing reconciliation and sustainability. I'm very, very excited about today's event. So with that, I'd like to suggest that I think, Andrea, you can give us a little bit of tutelage on the miracles of Zoom so that you as participants can get the most out of this meeting. Andrea.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so just I know everyone's probably familiar with Zoom, but for those who have not joined on Zoom before, welcome. And this is a meeting platform, so you have the ability to communicate in the chat, and that will be open for the entire webinar. The webinar is being recorded, as we said, so you're welcome to leave your video on or off, whatever you're most comfortable with. Should you like to post a question in the chat, feel free to do so. And during the question and answer period, I will be going through the chat and trying to find themes of the most popular questions. There's also a new Zoom function where you can hover around a chat and you can like it. And I appreciate that. So it can upvote the comments that align with the questions that you would like to ask. So please feel free to do that as well. And if we do have time, you're also welcome to ask your question verbally, in which case you'll be asked to unmute, at which time you can raise your hand, and you can see if you go to the reactions function on the chat, on the Zoom bar at the bottom, you can raise your hand and lower your hand in that way, but only during the question and answer period. We would appreciate that. And if you do have any questions regarding Zoom, please also post those in the chat and we'd be happy to address them.
Great, thanks, Andrea. And I would like to invite you all to consider the chat for its utility as a place to ask questions. It's not intended in this session to be a place where there's separate conversations. I'd like to ask you all to focus, if you can, on the speakers and the conversation at hand, and simply use the chat to pose your questions. And that would help us a lot if you follow that guideline. I also just wanted to mention, I would dearly love to be in Sq'eq'ó traditional territory today to join you, but I am actually joining you from another wonderful traditional territory, the unceded ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Matsqui nations, and I come to you with respect and gratitude in the spirit of friendship in that regard. So now let's get started in the most important part of the day. I'd just like to make some important acknowledgements. I'd like to express, first of all, my sincere appreciation to the Leq'á Mathxwi Samath Society, the LMS Society, and its member nations, and the City of Mission for taking precious time out of very busy schedules to work with the Fraser Basin Council, Realizing UNDRIP Initiative, to present this important story of land back. And in particular, I'd like to thank Cynthia Collins, who serves as referral officer for the Mathxwi First Nation and also as family representative to the Mathxwi governing body, Mike Uni, the CAO, Chief Administrative Officer of the City of Mission, and our speakers today who have guided our Realizing UNDRIP team in the planning for this learning event. So to start us off with sharing of this story, it's my great pleasure to introduce Daryl McCamey, who is a counselor with the Leq'á First Nation and the chair of the LMS Society. And Daryl will be joined in this presentation by Barclay Pithakeli, who is the Deputy City Manager for the City of Mission. So with no further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Daryl to start us off.
Thank you, Bob. Is my screen up? Everything's good to go there?
Looks great.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Bob, and thank you to the Fraser Basin Council team for hosting this webinar and providing us the venue to share our journey. We're honored to share this story with you, and we hope that it inspires folks to begin a journey of your own. This is a land back story, and it's touched multiple generations of our families and our communities. I want to start by acknowledging the hard work of so many leaders and members of the Leq'á, Mathxwi, and Samath nations over many decades, paving our way here today with perseverance, strength, and determination. We wish to raise our hands to those in the City of Mission and the province of British Columbia who have contributed to this story and success as well. And I also just want to acknowledge Barclay Pithakeli and Cynthia and Mike and the Fraser Basin team for helping get everything organized for today's event. So as mentioned, my name is Daryl McCamey. My traditional name is Nikamin. I'm the grandson of Susan Lewis. She was a council member of the first all-women chief and council in British Columbia here at Leq'á. My mother was, or is, Susan McCamey, and she was the chief of Leq'á for nine years. And I was first elected when I was 20 years old, and I'm now serving my 22nd consecutive year with my council. And I'm very honored to be appointed by the chief and council members that make up the directors of the LMS Society as our spokesperson. So basically, we're going to share a story today of a common goal that morphed into a meaningful relationship. This story obviously starts way back with colonialism and the loss of our lands. Back in 2011, the Sq'eq'ó chiefs were approached by the province of British Columbia looking for support of a sponsored Crown grant and the transfer of 60 hectares of land to the city of Mission. To our surprise, most of the chiefs of the nation, of the Sq'eq'ó Nation, were inclined to support this transfer of the 60 acres. However, Mathxwi stepped up, and specifically Councillor Brenda Morgan from Mathxwi stepped up and actually pumped the brakes on this and asked the simple question of, hold on, why would we give up Crown lands that once belonged to us back to a municipality when there's an opportunity here for us to get our land back? Brenda reached out to Leq'á and Semá and spoke to Chief Dalton Silver, who sends his regrets today, and myself, and got our communities all together in a room to have a discussion about this. The thing is this all happened before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established, and it was for us, it was for real a long shot, but something that we weren't prepared to give up on. And with Brenda pulling us together and kind of getting the ball rolling, here we are today. Many times along this journey, we asked ourselves, will we ever see a finish line? This has been ongoing for 13 years now, and we never gave up. And here we are today sharing our story of this journey. There is no existing path for First Nations, and there still is no existing path for First Nations to obtain a sponsored Crown grant. There's no supporting provincial policy for it, and additionally, First Nation communities still today under the Indian Act are not allowed to hold fee simple properties. With this being the case, we needed a way to transfer land via a sponsored Crown grant to First Nations. So in 2013, we discovered a loophole with the help of others, and we formed the LMS Society, and we were able to obtain the sponsored Crown grant and have a vehicle that would be able to hold the fee simple lands on behalf of our communities. So LMS honors all those in our nations who have been involved and supported us to represent our communities consistently throughout this period of time. And of course, our ancestors that give us strength and began this journey long before we did. So in Mission, the first Indian residential school was established in the 1860s, and then another replaced in the 1900s, approximately 3/4 of a kilometer east of the original school. These lands we're discussing today lie immediately between the two old Indian residential school sites. Survivors use these lands and that we've reclaimed, and they utilize those lands as a place to escape, find some solace and peace for what little time they could get away from the treachery and torment that they faced in the schools. Both Mission and LMS wish to protect these parklands in their natural state for many significant reasons, mainly the one that I just shared. So engagement with the city began with different councils over the years before we got traction. At no point along that way has any of the councils ever opposed the goal LMS had. However, later on in recent years with recent councils, we learned that Mission had a lot to offer in assisting us in our goal, which we'll dive into later on. But before we get there, I'm going to pass this over to Barclay.
Yeah, so just from a city perspective, there was a lot of people involved in this journey, and it's been taking place over probably about 12 plus years. So really a political thanks goes out to our past mayor, Pam Alexis, and Randy Hawes. Pam Alexis, as you may know, is an MP for our region, and our current mayor and council, Paul Horn, Berard, Gill, Davies, Ficus, Hamilton, and Elias, and Cal Crawford, who retired last term. And from a staff perspective, we need to really thank our current CAO, Mike Cuny, and our past CAO, Ron Poole, and Maureen Sinclair, who is our director of parks, who has recently retired, and some other staff, including myself. So we've all been involved in assisting this transfer of lands back to First Nations, and we take a lot of pride in the work that we've done. Thanks, Daryl.
Thanks, Berkeley. So the 60 hectares, or the 149.8 acres of land, is east of the heart of Mission's downtown. It's nestled in a highly populated area of urban and suburban Mission, and this piece of land is actually a prime piece of real estate that no doubt had potential for Mission's future growth. So this is a proposed survey plan for the subdivided lots that will be coming out of this property. So essentially, there's 149.8 acres. Roughly 30 acres is being subdivided out for economic opportunities for the LMS communities. And originally, if you look in the northwest portion of this survey plan, or proposed survey plan, you'll see an orange polygon. Originally, that lot was proposed to be north to south. It was an old plan that was proposed. With the help of the city planning department and working together as a team, we were encouraged to take, or LMS directors were encouraged to take a walk up into the area, and we kind of followed the topographical map that was shared with us, that the original lot north to south went, and it went down in through gullies, water courses, and what have you. So not much of it was really developable and really restricted any economic opportunity that LMS would have had. However, with the assistance of the city planning department and the city staff that made themselves available to help us, they help us find the highest and best use. And we've now come up with this proposed plan of this L-shaped polygon. You'll also see it's easement almost in white. There's a new subdivision in the top north portion of this map. And basically what the city asked in return was like, is it possible to leave a green space? Because that subdivision is quite new, and the citizens that purchased up there had an understanding they would have a green space. So for LMS, it was quite obvious that, you know, as a relationship and team, we want to work together so everybody leaves happy, and we were happy to oblige with offering the 30 meters of green space. On the south portion of the map, you'll see the red polygon, and that red polygon is right adjacent to Highway 7, or the Lougheed Highway. It's being proposed or slated for commercial residential development. So in 2016, the city was working on their OCP, and they invited LMS in to discuss these potential parcels. And they worked with us to come up with highest and best uses so that it could be included in the OCP, which is what we did.
Yeah, and it should be noted, Daryl, that we had these lands sort of designated for commercial residential, not in this exact configuration, but generally speaking in around this area for quite some time.
Yeah, thanks, Barkley. So where we went from there is, over the course of the discussions and plans for us to take the land back, all along we knew that the City of Mission's ultimate goal was to have a park. This area, this crown land, was heavily used by the citizens of Mission, and it made sense for the city to add this park space. So as I'd mentioned earlier, this all had begun before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established and started working. However, LMS recognized that relationship with the city was important. The city was supportive all the way through, from us pumping the brakes on the sponsored Crown grant and the transfer to us stepping forward and saying we would like to have the land transferred back to us. And so with that relationship and bond forming, LMS had proposed that we offer a 99-year lease to the city of Mission. This was early on with the province. The province was delighted to hear this, obviously, and the rest is history. So basically, as soon as the transaction completes, immediately a 99-year lease goes into place, and the city of Mission will have a 99-year lease of this area for park space at a nominal fee. The city then came to us and suggested creating a joint park management committee made up of LMS and Mission staff. And this was perfect for us because when the city plans over the year for events, we can add to that schedule and ensure that cultural events we may want to hold, for one example, like a powwow, we would be able to plan that event, have it added to the calendar. The city's aware, our communities are aware, and you know, everything's great. On the other hand, the city also can plan their events and what have you that may come up for the park, or maybe some changes, fences, whatever that may be added to the site, and it gives that committee the opportunity to weigh in on this, these types of developments along the way. I'm going to pass it back to you, Barclay.
Thanks, Daryl. So from a city perspective, this is quite a unique sort of transfer of land back to First Nations. And one of the things that we realized early on is that the LMS Society, by being a society, was transferring the lands in a fee simple format. This was not an addition to reserve, and it was not through the treaty process. So what this did is this is a very, very new way for municipalities to view land back sort of transactions. And what this allowed us to do is it gave us certainty in moving forward, because we knew that these were going to be fee simple lands. So from a land use certainty, we could utilize our current OCP and zoning bylaws and work with the LMS Society to develop a plan that met everybody's goals. And it gave us financial security as well, in terms of not losing any taxation revenue that may come of the development portion of the lands. In addition to this, it was a great relationship building exercise. It's taken time, but in the end, this is really a true partnership. Through the development processes, planning and engineering are working with the LMS Society to come up with the best possible cost-effective developments. This is a true co-management plan for the parkland area. All decisions will be made through that committee that will be struck with between the city and the LMS Society membership. It also gave us some great contacts for other issues that we're facing in the city, whether it's referrals or OCP amendments. And we often will call up Daryl or anybody else within the LMS Society, whether it's at Matsqui or Semá, to just have a chat and talk about any of the issues that we may be having. From a learning opportunity perspective, this was really an important aspect for our council and the political will. You know, before you can have reconciliation, you have to understand the truths of the land. And what this allowed us to do is really do a deep dive into asking questions and about understanding what this land meant and the values it represents. It led to changing some of the signage that was, quite frankly, a whitewashing of the history of these lands, and we removed them fairly quickly after we kind of learned the truth about what was happening on these lands. And from a legacy perspective, this is a really forward approach, and it's a true future partnership opportunity for us and the LMS Society. We've already been talking about different opportunities throughout the city for us to partner on projects, and I think that's the most important aspect that we're moving forward with. And you'll see our new logo on the bottom left-hand corner. This has kind of led us to realize that our logo was really about some of the, our previous logo was about some of the very hurtful past that was taking place in Mission. So we've designed this logo with our First Nations partners in mind, and putting it as the red cedar, which is an important cultural aspect to First Nations history, but it's also a very important aspect to our current history as well. In Mission, that was saw a lot of shaken cedar mills as well. So it has multiple meanings, but I think removing some of the sort of historic past out of our city logo is an important first step that we're realizing as we move forward in this journey.
Thanks, Barclay. So to the agreement. So originally this agreement was called a reconciliation agreement, and that's what they're known as around the province. However, in an LMS session, Stan Morgan of the Morgan family rep for Mathxi's governing body spoke up one day and pointed out a simple fact that reconciliation indicates that there was a relationship, maybe it was strained, and now we're reconciling this relationship. But the reality is there truly never was relationships that had really been established in British Columbia with First Nations. So we wanted to also add our culture to this agreement. So we wanted to utilize our language, and we came up with the name Sq'eq'ó, which means together we paddle. We reached out to Councillor Camille Laszlo of Leq'á, who's a linguist and UFV professor teaching Halk'mélim at the University of Fraser Valley. And we also kept in mind a saying that is well known among our people, and it is, if you paddle against each other, we spin in circles, but if we paddle together, we can travel forward no matter the currents before us. So this quote really resonates to us and this relationship that's formed. And it's being an ally means taking an active role to do whatever is within your power to ensure all individuals are treated equitably. As we've already shared, the city has resources that LMS has yet to acquire. The city shares where they can, and Mission helped us choose, for example, one of our consultants that we're working through all of this process with and preparing for subdivision and designations and all of the legwork that will occur with planning. They helped us select a group that was familiar with the city, that's worked with the city, and could help us streamline our process. It's a two-way street. Truthfully, this is a relationship that's been working for everyone. So for example, as well, and Barclay had already touched on this, like one example is the Mission waterfront development. So under Article 32 of UNDRIP, it really speaks to the consent and the need for that with First Nations. So basically, this relationship has created a situation where the City of Mission is able to engage LMS and start that preliminary discussion, although consultation still needs to happen with the individual communities. We get a head start very often working together and being able to have these discussions. And as Barclay had mentioned earlier, it's morphed into future projects that we're looking at doing that will assist the environment and also help build economic opportunity for both the city and our First Nation communities. So there was a common goal that started all of this, and BC saw a city and First Nations that were working together and wanted to support it. So although this all began before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established, along the way the TRC findings were delivered, and this relationship reflected the spirit and intent of the TRC had in mind when it came to reconciliation. BC has been patient when we needed time to collect info and engage our communities. It's challenging with smaller communities to get everybody in the same room. So what LMS did is a 3 community roadshow to touch base with our members and do the community engagement that was needed, which required some time. The negotiators we worked with were very respectful and understanding, and also worked to create a meaningful relationship between LMS and British Columbia, and that they sure did. they were and have continued to be amazing partners to LMS. And honestly, after 22 years, the relationships that have formed both with BC and the city have been phenomenal. As you'll see in the signing ceremony in July 2021, we blanketed the City of Mission delegates, the provincial delegates, and also the delegates that attended from Ottawa. If you're not aware, when Coast Salish communities blanket people, it is one of the highest honors that we offer to people that work with us. Barclay, back to you.
Yeah, so some of the key takeaways or key messaging that we've certainly learned through this journey is patience. There's no silver bullet here. There's no manual to guide us through this journey that we've been on for the last 12 plus years. It's taken time, and it's taken building those relationships. And I think we've built those and understanding some of the personal connections, finding out the commonalities about the shared values. What are they? Is there a shared vision, shared goals and aspirations? And finally, I think one of the biggest things is we had to have that political will. Without that political will, which has been cultivated over time, I think this would not have happened. Thankfully, we've had very open conversations with our politicians, and they were fully supportive moving forward. And I think if I go back to one of the key elements that the society brought to the table in this regard is that certainty that what the society was planning to do, and that openness to speak with the city about their aspirations and finding those commonalities and moving forward. So I think those were really the key messaging that I'd like to portray from a city perspective. It allayed a lot of fears that we had in terms of when we made the application in the first place. Having that certainty really kind of pushed it forward that this is going to be a true partnership as opposed to us versus like a developer or anything like that. So yeah, I think that's my key messaging there.
Thanks, some very good points, Barclay. So one more quote I'd like to share when I'm wrapping up here is, we all look for measures in relationships, whether that be professionally or personally. So I want to share this because it's true. Empathy and gratitude are a measure of a relationship's value. And to share a quick little story of this, in May of 2021, everybody will recall that the remains of 215 children were recovered at the Tecumloops Residential School. The day after the recovery occurred, I was driving home from work and my phone rang. It was the City of Mission. And I picked up thinking it was a business call, but it certainly was not a business call. Mike Uni had contacted me on behalf of the city and wanted to express their sympathy to us and offer any assistance that they could possibly provide us. It was an emotional call for me because I'd never experienced that in over 20 years in the political arena and working with different levels of government. It was sincere. Mike contacted and was offering, as mentioned, the resources we would need for searching the old residential school sites around Heritage Park, as well as anything else that we could use. I was emotional, to be totally honest, when I got that call, so I kind of cut it short, I think, and let Mike go. And I reached out to my peers later on that evening. In the meantime, I had also been contacted by Chief David Jimmy, who's the president of Sq'eq'ó Nation, who was letting me know that they were looking for poles to have totems carved to raise at the Coquelita site, which was an old residential school in Chilliwack, as well as the St. Mary's site in Mission. So I said, you know what, let me make a call and see what we can come up with. I had in the back of my mind, the City of Mission had a tree farm license. I called Mike back the next morning. I said, hey, Mike, what do you think the chances are we could get a couple poles to have carved for monuments at these sites? within minutes after that phone call, Chris Grenwald, who runs the tree farm for the city of Mission, contacts me and says, where am I dropping them off? Can you get people up here to pick the right poles with me? Is there a cultural practice we need to follow to do this? It turned out we only ended up needing one pole because one was provided in Chilliwack for their site. So the city graciously sent us a pole. They delivered it to a carving shed where Chief Terry Horn of Sq'eq'ó carved that a beautiful monument pole totem for the St. Mary's site, and for that we'll forever be grateful. But it really emulated the relationship and verified its meaning to us in that call. So I'll forever be grateful for that, and I'm sure I share that sentiment with my peers. That's all I have to offer at this point in the slideshow. I'm going to pass it over to Bob for question and discussion. So thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you, Barclay. Great presentation. I know in some of the initial stages of our prep, the deck could have been a lot longer with the details, but we decided we would present the highlights and then provide an opportunity for the participants to ask their questions. And there are no dumb questions. I think that this is a story, as it's noted in the chat, a beautiful story and a great roadmap for other municipal governments to follow. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a bit of a virtual coffee table where a conversation, and I'm going to be the questioner to just get us rolling on some of the key salient aspects of this story. And then I'm inviting you all to the participants to put your questions in the chat as well as you think of them, and we're going to do our very best to get to as many as possible. But I wanted to start off with the fact that in our experience with our Realizing UNDRIP initiative, different local governments are at different places on the journey. Some are just getting started. Some, as you've described, like the City of Mission, have really progressed down the track in a really meaningful way over the course of years. But for those who are just sort of getting started, not sure what tentative steps to take forward, what would be your advice to those? What key insights have you had when you pass back to the very beginning of this story? What would you recommend to those getting started or at a more primordial place along the journey? What should they do? What's the most important advice you'd give them?
Well, I'll start, Bob. I think that the very first place to start is open your doors. Don't be afraid to create that relationship. There's a lot of history, a lot of pain, I think, that needs to be considered, and sometimes it takes a little bit of airing out to get there. But I find that, and like, believe it or not, my career's already quite old, and I think that fear is one thing that's held both groups back, First Nations and municipalities. So to break down those barriers, it's getting in the room together, have a cup of coffee, and get to know one another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would concur, Bob. I would say that the relationship building is by far the preeminent sort of first step. I know for municipal governments, there are the C2C meetings, the community to community forums that can help, and there is some seed funding for those types of meetings through UBCM. One of the things that we struggled with being in local government for as long as I have is getting the C2Cs and getting our elected officials just to talk about relationship building and the commonalities. They really want to get down to business, and they want to talk about what's happening on reserve or what's happening with our OCPs or whatever. But that's not the first step. The first step is really about relationship building, finding those commonalities and finding those people that you can connect with, and that would be my key takeaway there.
Thank you to for your answers from both of you. And thinking about Daryl and feel free, Chief Alice, Cindy, Mike, others on the team here to share. But, one of the most important discoveries is this power of relationship and taking the time to create it in a good way. And I guess I'll start with Daryl. What are the kinds of qualities you see in good allies or good aspiring allies? You mentioned empathy. Can't forget that story of Mike giving you a call at a very difficult time is an example of that. Other qualities that you see in good non-Indigenous allies of Indigenous people?
Yeah, that's a good question, Bob. Honestly, it comes down to like sharing. The reality is like we're small communities. We run lean and mean departments. We, financially are quickly now moving forward economically as communities, but we still lack the financial means to have the capacity that a municipality has, the size of departments and expertise they have to offer. I can honestly say that the City of Mission for the last several years has been an open door and open to assisting us, not just with this project, but like our lands department, for example, is trying to create development laws, for example. So the city hears about this and they're quick to offer like assistance where needed. I'm welcome to send my lands director over to the planning department to learn things here and there. So that sharing is like it's huge, it's key, and at the end of the day, our communities could be connected with infrastructure, right? So it just makes sense.
So that's an example of a kind of institutional empathy where there's an appreciation on the part of the city for the capacity challenges that your nation are facing, and to actually materially do something about that by offering up some supports that help overcome some of those capacity challenges. So I'm going to turn it over to Barclay and ask the question about shifts that you've seen, Barclay, over the course of this, and I'm looking for sort of shifts in the sort of the attitude and aptitudes of both the individuals working for the city and the city itself in terms of its decision making. Maybe you could touch a little bit on what were the big shifts that you saw that were actually really positive in terms of building relationships in a good way, building trust and getting stuff done together.
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned before, I think one of the biggest fears that municipalities have when we talk about like the TRC's calls to action, in particular, I think it's number 47, the land back, is how that land is transferred back. I think there's, being involved in some of the treaty processes in the Stalo territories. There is that treaty process. There's the reconciliation processes, and then there's the additions to reserves that was introduced by legislation, probably 15 years ago. And so there's a lot of fear about it at the municipal level about what those impacts are going to be on municipalities, whether it's taxation loss or servicing capacity, loss of parkland, for example. There's all sorts of fears. And I think what happened here is that the LMS Society found a really unique way to get those lands back in a fee simple form that really they allayed our fears on how those lands were going to be transferred back to First Nations. And when we found out the common goals and interests of those lands were shared values, it really was in the political best interest of our city to support it. And I'll be quite blunt about it, that the society really helped us along that journey, because there was a lot of fear going into this when that application was kind of blocked from the referral process, because we just didn't know what happens next. So
great. So fear can be a great obstacle, and overcoming fear and with a can-do attitude and being thinkers outside the box of historical ways of doing things is a great step forward. I'd like to turn to Chief McKay. You've been listening to this conversation, and I'm very curious about what comes up for you, what strikes you, and what kind of advice do you have given this conversation?
Well, it's kind of easy and it's already been said, but I will repeat the parts that I really like. And I think the biggest thing for me is, as they said in the beginning, it's taken decades to get where we are. I think that the want to keep going, the need to keep going and not quitting after a few years and thinking, it's not going to go anywhere. I think being strong and being consistent is very important. That realizing that our ancestors did pave the way for us, they did all the work for us, and it's our obligation, and it's our obligation to our members to keep this going. I know that, when, and I thank Daryl for mentioning about the reconciliation, because no matter where I go, and no matter who I speak to, I always talk about reconciliation. And sometimes I can get a little slap in the wrist because not everybody understands my passion. But I agree with my grandson, Stanley. He's the one that said it, that there was never a relationship to begin with. And I think we're all aware of that. And the reason I say that, I say it very, very openly and honestly, is because I am a residential school survivor. I went to residential school. My grandparents, my great-grandparents went to residential school. We are suffering today still. We are knee-deep in intergenerational trauma. So when you establish a relationship and you build a relationship with us, that number one is that we're not all the same. I am very introverted. I depend on my counselor, Brenda Morgan, to do a lot of the speaking. Her and I will have conversations, Cindy, Stanley, Brenda and I will have conversations. And usually Brenda's the one that speaks out for me, because I have that built inside of me that I am not allowed to speak. I am to sit back and listen. But we do carry our conversations on. So there are some of us that are like this. It doesn't mean we're not interested. It doesn't mean that we don't have anything to say. It means that we've said it through our peers. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we will continue on this journey. It's an amazing, beautiful journey, and I'm happy to see all the comments. We are setting precedents as far as we're concerned. We've talked so many times about other people doing this, establishing the relationships, working together. The last thing that I'm going to say is my brother was the chief in 1980, early 80s, 70s, 80s. And he always said, we have to work with the municipalities. We have to work with the surrounding people, because they are our neighbors and we need to get along. And I think that was so important. And I always remember that. And I'm always willing to open my mind, open my heart, and not only listen with my ears, but listen with my heart as well. So that's all I have to say for now. And I do appreciate everything that's been said by Daryl and the other speakers, because they hit the nail right on the head. So that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief McKay, and you just hit it on the head too with your remarks, and I really appreciate the importance of your remarks and the importance of us as non-Indigenous people to do our work, to commit to learning and to understanding and to adopt new ways of engaging and thinking out loud about that. Just so happens next week, we're putting on a session called Ethical Space, and it's how to have these conversations where there's the horror of the past is one of the sort of elephants in the room, that needs to be understood, and not just from an intellectual standpoint, but from really a heart standpoint, as you noted, Chief, as and from multiple dimensions. So thank you so much for that. That's beautiful. So to Barclay and to Daryl, and to what degree did the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which, as you all know, is fully embraced now by BC and Canada, did it support this work at some point? And even if it didn't, on reflection, and you alluded to it earlier, Daryl, on reflection, what aspects of this work do you think link with and support the realization of the UN Declaration?
Well, I'll start off, Bob. I think where it directly ties to the articles of the UN Declaration is 26, Article 26, which mainly speaks to the rights of Indigenous people within their lands and territories, and then 32, which speaks to the consent, not just consultation anymore, because that was always a struggle. And after the Sq'eq'ó decision, it was made quite clear that consent is required. But as I mentioned, this had all begun before even the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was assembled, and we were fortunate to be way ahead of that, because when they actually brought forward the commission's findings, and then the province implemented their policies, it literally kind of put us into a warp speed for sections of this process, which got us excited finally, because like I had mentioned in the slides earlier, there had been many times where, you start to feel a little discouraged, and thankfully we have the strength of Chief McKay and Chief Silver that were at the table, that were like, no, we're going to keep forging forward. And, it kept us going. And with the UNDRIP being implemented across Canada, well, by the feds and then the province, it really moved us forward and got things going. And honestly, it does come down to the fact that we were ahead of the game, and the province implemented policy and was like, hey, look, here's our perfect opportunity to emulate what we're trying to do here, because we got 3 First Nations and city that are working together in a partnership, which is unheard of. And I've even heard like nationally from folks that I know in Ottawa that they don't believe there's any other agreements like this one nationwide, let alone just in the province of British Columbia.
Isn't that wonderful? In a lot of ways, the work was prescient. It actually happened before the embracing of the UN Declaration, and serendipitously or otherwise, it supported the realization of the UN Declaration. Sometimes things are done by design, sometimes by accident, and sometimes they're serendipitous. So again, you were way ahead of your time, trailblazing in this new area. So to both of you, what's the most exciting aspect of the relationship today? And I'd say the institutional relationships as well as the personal relationships. But also, what are some of the challenging aspects of the relationship today and in the future? And I'll pick one as an example of a challenge. And I've seen this on other fronts. Given that building of a trust-based relationship is on a one-on-one basis is so key to these kinds of successes, what happens when people change roles? And do you have an approach when people change roles? Because, it could be a different personality that takes the helm, and it could set things back. So back to the question, the most exciting aspect of the relationship, and what about the challenges, including the challenges of new faces?
So I'll start with that one. So I think from a city perspective, I think this partnership is going to open up so many different opportunities from the city's perspective that will benefit both the city and element society, from an economic perspective to an environmental sustainability perspective. And we've already been talking about different projects throughout the city that could occur. And that for me is one of the most exciting. What the future holds for this relationship is, I think, truly inspiring, and I'm quite excited to see it move forward. In terms of change of staff or anything like that, the city's actually adopted some principles of reconciliation. We know that there's a long way to go in terms of what our policies and our bylaws state, and our decision-making processes, but our first step was to hire a First Nations consultant, Ms. Gwen Bridge, who I believe is speaking. Is it next week? Yeah, there you go. She assisted us in going through that journey to come up with those principles that really inform our decision makers, so our politicians and council and mayor, and our senior level management. how to make decisions and who to talk to and who do we consult with and who do we ask questions of, and making sure that we are constantly in conversation with our First Nation neighbors. And I think that has really been, that's embedded now in our sort of decision-making processes. So no matter who comes after me or who comes after Mike or who comes after our mayor, those are embedded into our culture now. So.
Thanks, Barclay. And I mean, Barclay pretty much nailed it, but when I think about the excitement, it's obviously the relationship is huge for us. And as Alice mentioned, most of us at the table have been around for a couple decades and have experienced attempts to kind of form a relationship. And it wasn't that there wasn't interest in it, it just wasn't formulating to today where it's like, there's a legitimate relationship, like Mike will reach out to Chief McKay or reach out to Chief Silver, reach out to Chief Thompson or myself here at Leq'á. Like it's a simple phone call and we're quick to answer those calls, right? Further to that, as mentioned by Barclay, like we're already looking at like environmental stewardship projects together and future other future developments, looking at other lands. Like there's so much more that's already happening. It's very exciting, but ultimately for me, that relationship's key, right? Because none of that happens without that first. As far as challenges go, you know, we were elated when the city implemented their principles, and it really established like how deeply rooted this relationship's become. And honestly, like I spent almost half my life in Mission and half my life here in Leq'á, and I know a lot of people. My family is an old family in the city, and it's certainly, the tune has changed around First Nations in the city of Mission. There's a lot of support there. And again, that relationship is so deeply rooted that you can hear it in the citizens now when they're talking. So I think a change at the helm politically won't impact the relationship at this point. It's part of Mission today.
Very good. So my last question really kind of brings us back to the connection between this work and the overarching need for sustainability. And I think it's not lost on anyone on this call that we've got some significant challenges from climate change to flooding, to heat domes, to flooding, to a myriad of issues that relate to the need to change. So I'm curious about the unexpected doors that are opening as a consequence, and you alluded to it just now, Daryl. So what kinds of unexpected doors are opening as a consequence of that effort building relationship? And are you seeing any specific outcomes that relate to sustainability, that important word that relates to looking out for 7 generations from here?
Yeah, sure. I think one prime example is, I think it was last summer, Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, but last summer I was contacted by Mayor Horn related to some flood mitigation concerns in the Matsqui area, which borders one of Leq'á's reserves, as well as the territory that we share with Mathxwi and Semá. Regional district was involved, and they reached out and wanted to know like if we would be supportive of some work that needed to be done to help mitigate flood risks, but also protect the environment of the Matsqui Lake area. So, you know, we partnered up, had a couple conversations, shot a letter off to the province, and before you know it, we're getting all the backing and support from BC that wasn't there previously in attempts previously, right? So strength definitely comes in numbers. Our relationship is well recognized, and when we get together and speak up, we're definitely a lot louder, and it certainly is paying off. And I mean, sustainably, I think that all kind of wraps it all up, right? Like we're protecting the environment. We have that common goal. Mission is a very green city, and I understand or believe that they want to keep it that way, and I know LMS certainly does. And we're going to continue to work together to reassure that sustainability of the environment for our future generations. Absolutely.
Super. Barclay, did you have anything to add to that?
Not really, no. I mean, that was a really good example of an initiative where we, gathering together, like we got so many different jurisdictions involved that the province had to listen. So
yeah, nothing more powerful than a united front, and particularly when you see united front involving the nation's governments and municipal governments. Great story. So I'm going to turn to the chat. There's a question that came up that's about the public, bringing the public along with you on this journey. And we all know about the vagaries of political change, and the public can sometimes not have all of the information and can make conclusions in a half-baked kind of way. So where's the public in all this? And I include the public as well as the community members of the nations, as well as the broader community of Mission. What do you advise this group of participants on how to bring the public along? And I see you nodding, Chief Alice, and you can feel free to start us off if you wish.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm hearing Barclay's comments about the city of Mission and their policies around reconciliation. That works both ways. I'm going to get to what you asked in a second. That works both ways. We change as councils as well. So I think the biggest thing that we need to do is educate our members and educate the public and get them on board. So or I shouldn't say if, but when our roles change, the people that are here, our members, are going to keep this moving. So we have to educate, we have to share, and we've done that. LMS has done that with our communities. We've traveled community to community and did our presentations to our community members, which was really good. But I think that the most important thing to me is education, sharing the good things, sharing the challenges, having solutions, not just coming in with, questions, but also have solutions. So I think that's really, really important. And I'm going to hand it over to Daryl or Barclay now to continue the conversation. So thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Thank you, Chief.
yeah, and I think from the city's perspective, I mean, we've always recognized that we can't have reconciliation without understanding the truths behind the stories and the lands. So we've taken a sort of a proactive measure to educate our politicians and our elected officials about, not just generally speaking what First Nations have gone through in the past, but we brought it down to the local level. So understanding what the St. Mary's School was and what it meant, and what the lands it sat on meant. So we've tried to do a really, really proactive role in educating our council, and in turn, we've hopefully those stories get out into the public as well. Obviously, we can't control public sentiment a lot, but I don't think I've heard of anybody coming forward and saying anything negative about this work that we've been working towards here. So.
Yeah, and to add to that, what LMS did to engage our communities really set the table. I think what we did is we did a 3 community roadshow basically with the directors and tech team members, educating each of our communities. Each of our communities are significantly different, probably even more so than municipalities, right? We're all family and we're all related one way or another, but we're all raised with different, ideas, right? And so what we did is we went from community to community and kind of exhibited how each of the 3 communities came together, and each of the 3 communities' wants and needs, expectations were all kind of rolled in together as one. And then we answered some tough questions. Like, people were curious why we would go with fee simple land versus adding to reserve, and we could explain together that comes to property value, it comes to uses, it comes to leverage financially, and all these different things for us to move this forward. And also like how it benefits our partners, right? And how long-term that helps us out as well when it comes to infrastructure connections, what have you, to those developments. So that paid dividends. We started getting a lot more questions in our communities about it. We opened dialogue, and people started to better understand and see that. And in the meantime, what I noticed at our community in those discussions were people started to realize the value of the relationship between the municipality and LMS, and then our individual nations as well on top of that. So it went so much further than just us going around to each community saying, yay, we got 60 hectares of land back. It became more of a, yay, we got this land back, and hey, we also benefit from this excellent new relationship. And like I'd mentioned earlier, in the city of Mission, like, you know, we do have community engagement sessions that will be coming up when it comes to the subdivision plans for this property, and we are preparing for that. LMS and the city have talked about having LMS front and center in those discussions with the mayor and council, and that's what we plan to do.
Super. Excellent. There was a question about the constitution of the city of Mission and how this work is incorporated in the constitution of the city to honor commitments even with electoral changes. Now, Barclay, you did punch a link into the chat that I may have been in response to that question, but I just wondered if you or Mike had any commentary on sort of, I hesitate to use the term, but hardwiring the commitments such that as the turbulent winds of political change unfold, that the city continues to stay the course. I think you're on mute, Barclay. Yep.
I think the principles of reconciliation that we adopted as a city really ingrained those principles into our everyday lives. So it's something that we took seriously when we did it. We wanted to engage First Nations in developing those principles, and that's why we did hire Gwen Bridge to assist us in that journey, because there's no way we could have done it ourselves. But I think it's something that our council really has embraced, and I think that's the political will I spoke to earlier. Without that, I don't think it happens. But we got the political will by educating and telling the truth about Mission and what these lands meant to First Nations in the past, and what they meant after settlement as well. So there's a lot of history here, and that needs to be stated. And I think once people sort of understood that, I think people became more on board with it, especially our elected officials.
Mm-hmm.
So I did post a little bit of a link there that shows what the city is up to and what we're doing. We did engage First Nations, and that prompted the principles were prompted out of our huge waterfront redevelopment planning work that we did, and it laid the groundwork for how we made decisions and moved forward with our First Nation partners on that planning process as well. So, and it's ingrained in all our future planning processes as well. So,
super. We have a very specific question. Of course, the agony of referrals and how referrals can possibly be addressed with the capacity constraints of the nations. But is there any contribution from the city around that referrals challenge? And I don't think there's anyone that can speak on behalf of the province, but whether there's any support for that, because I certainly have seen it firsthand, how difficult it is with the avalanche of referrals, which I think in some ways kind of look like the old way of doing things, where a project is designed and then there's a referral, as opposed to co-creating the project in the first place with the nations. However, I digress. The specific question is around funding support for the referrals management on the nation side.
Yeah, I'll talk to that. So yeah, it's always a bit of a unknown, I guess, right now. But we don't really. There's no mechanism for us to pay for referrals legally. The province must do referrals to First Nations, and typically they've got funding arrangements in place. We've spoken to the Sq'eq'ó Nation, who I think they do most of the referrals for most of the members of Sq'eq'ó Nation, other than Leq'á and Matsqui. And Sumas, I think, is the only one. Semá is the only one part of that agreement. Anyway, to make a long story short, is the province pays for it. Yes, they pay for it, and anything that we must refer to First Nations, it's paid through for the province. That being stated, we try to engage our First Nations really, really early on, and that's that part of that relationship building that we've wanted to cultivate. So, for example, our waterfront planning project and redevelopment project, First Nations are part of the conversations from an early stage. In fact, there's lots of opportunities we can see in the future to partner with the LMS Society on developing that waterfront section and getting some land back in that regard. So, it's more of a partnership when we talk about our relationship with our local First Nations. In particular, the LMS Society has been such a great partner for us that there's been never really a talk about a referral funding scheme. Is that fair to say, Daryl?
Yeah, so yeah, there's really nothing in writing or anything like that, Bob, related to the referrals. Mathxwi and Leq'á currently are working on our own SIA agreement, strategic engagement agreement, where we'll be somewhat working together with referrals, but we're maintaining our own autonomy basically through that process. So we're funded for it. It's underfunded, obviously. There just simply isn't enough there to go through that process. I think if push comes to shove and there is a need to add some resources and stuff there, that's a conversation that we would engage the city comfortably on, and whether they can afford to assist or not is left up to that discussion at that time.
Understood. Great. Thanks for fielding that question. So I'm just going to invite folks to put your hand up if you wish to use the hand icon, if you'd like to verbally ask a question at this juncture. I do note a question from our very own Andrea McDonald about youth. And so while folks are thinking about your questions, obviously, and given my vintage, I worry about ensuring that our young people are with us, and that we're doing everything we can to ensure that they can carry the baton when we go on our way. So I'm wondering about youth engagement, and particularly in relation to this, and what opportunities there are to ensure that their voices are heard, and that they have the tools and skills to carry on as leaders into the future.
Well, COVID obviously played a big role in us not being able to get a lot of this message out over the time that we were actually making huge gains after the province implemented their policies, and things really, like I said, went into warp speed with this. But all of our communities, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief McKay or Cynthia, but all of our communities allow members 18 years plus to vote in membership meetings, but we also keep the door open. Any one of our youth can join a membership meeting and sit in and listen and learn. Very, very factual point that I'll make, though, is, like I said, over 20 years in the arena with my community. Back when I graduated, we were lucky to see 3 or 4 students graduate grade 12, where today we're seeing almost every single one of them graduate. And we have like wait lists for university and stuff like that in the community. So as our kids are getting significantly educated and preparing to replace us who didn't have that opportunity, We're definitely trying to keep them up to speed and ensure that they understand like these relationships are the future and certainly are going to mean a lot for them advancing us forward. And one thing about our culture that's crystal clear and at the LMS table is pretty much reminded every single session is that we're looking out for the next 7 generations. What we do today has to have a positive impact 100 years from today. We won't make decisions that will have a negative impact on our youth 100 years from now. And we maintain that position and we'll continue to support that all the way through.
Thanks for that, Daryl. That's very inspiring. Barclay, did you have anything to add to that question?
I think, no, not really.
Okay, well, thank you. This has been marvelous. I'm going to invite the participants, if you'd like to put in the chat what sort of aha moment or key takeaway you have from this discussion, this learning that you're inspired to act upon after this meeting is adjourned. So feel free to share in the chat. We're very curious about what really has struck out, what's really struck you about what you've heard this afternoon. And I know we could have this conversation for a lot longer, but busy lives preclude it. But we are looking forward to building on this learning event, and please stay tuned in that regard. So I just wanted to raise my hands to Daryl and to Barclay, Chief McKay, to Mike, to Cindy, for all of your support and inspiration around putting on this event. I'm so grateful. I can't, words fail me, and that's, as those who know me would be puzzled by that. So with that, I think I'll wrap it up with just a couple of information bits. Andrea, if you don't mind bringing up our closing slides. We do have a really important learning event next week on ethical space, so the principles and practice, and back to Chief McKay's earlier points. And I would just like to say to the Indigenous participants on this call, if you're interested in being part of this, we will certainly waive the fee associated with that, and we'll just reach out to me or Andrea, and we'll make sure we get you a proper code. But this is a really important session that is really a starter session on the importance of creating a good space for conversations to unfold, for relationships to be built, and for trust to be restored. So I do invite you all to register for this event. It's a limited attendance event, and we hope you will join us for that next week. Next, Andrea. And we are very interested in your feedback. And as Andrea knows, I always call these things on the screen doohickeys, but there's something you can scan with your iPhone. And also Andrea will be plugging that into the chat. We're very interested in your feedback on today's session, and also what you might be interested in learning more about in the future. So please take a few moments while it's still fresh in your minds and hearts to share how this has gone for you, and what's really been helpful, and what you'd like to see more of in the future. Thank you in advance for taking the time to fill out the form. And so lastly, with that, I guess the best way to end this session is to, again, thank all of you. Thank you for the participants that have taken the time out of your very busy schedules to learn. And thank you so much for the story. This is a powerful story. And I should add, it's just one of the many things, I should say, the city is doing. And Barclay, you may not be quite free of me yet, because I know that there may be other stories to tell about the city's relationship, for example, up in Stave West, and some of the work that's happening with other nations. So stay tuned, and please take a look at realizingundrip.ca and registering your interest in staying informed with the work of this initiative. So with that, I will bid you a wonderful rest of day. Please enjoy the what appears to be the emergence of spring. Take that time to unchain yourselves from your computers and take a breath of fresh air and enjoy the connections with all our relations. Again, thank you for being here, and I wish you well in your journeys from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.